Hello everyone and welcome to another Shadowlands PTR and Beta preview video. Today we're going to be talking about the new and upcoming changes that were announced on August 11th for the enhancement and big changes for the Elemental Shaman that have been recently updated onto the PTR. We're going to have a lot of footage and information for you in this video, so without further ado, let's get right into it. Before we get started, I just wanted to do a quick heads up. All the information that's pulled from Wowhead can be accessible in the description down below. The links to those articles can be found there. If you guys want to check out my Twitter and Instagram social medias, you're more than welcome to. You can find those down there as well. And you can find my Twitch live stream where I stream every day of the week, doing Elemental Shaman and Enhancement Shaman content pretty much all the time, and leveling through Shadowlands and doing all the beta testing and awesome alpha stuff there. Check those stuff out. We'll get into the video now. So we are seeing some pretty significant changes when it comes to the Elemental Shaman and some notable ones when it comes to the Enhancement Shaman on this week's PTR and Beta update. The current version, just to get started with Elemental Shaman, the current version of Fulmination and Seismic Thunder in Shadowlands has a lot of different abilities generating a lot of different buffs. And as Blizzard states, this makes the spec itself feel disjointed and things just don't mesh, and cohesive existence just doesn't happen between your spells in rotation. So they fixed this by adding just everything to Fulmination and getting rid of Seismic Thunder. So we're pretty much back at Maelstrom. It's just under a different name. We'll get into it. The first spell that we're going to talk about is Chain Lightning. So Chain Lightning and its overloads that strike 2 or more targets now generate a single stack of Fulmination. The way that it used to work obviously was you could cast Chain Lightning on 2 or more targets and it would just generate a stack of Seismic Thunder. Seismic Thunder reduces the cast time and increases the damage of your next Earthquake by 20%. So you had to stack Seismic Thunder up 5 times before you get an instant Earthquake out, which, okay, was fine. But the only issue was you couldn't funnel damage into a target unless you had like Flame Shocks and Lava Bursts going into that target. And it just felt a little weird when you were Chain Lightning, not really getting anything out of it other than Earthquakes. This being said, we've moved over to just Fulmination, which is great. I think that's a great change, except it just plays a lot more like Maelstrom, so it doesn't really feel like we've gotten anywhere. Lava Burst and its overloads now generate 1 stack of Fulmination. This is fantastic because Lava Burst before just did damage and it only interacted with Flame Shock. Obviously that was an issue because we're moving from Maelstrom where all of your generator spells generated and you had 2 spender spells. And now we have all of these generator spells back again and 2 spender spells, obviously Earthshock and Earthquake. And you could actually throw in Elemental Blast there too, since it does consume Fulmination. Earthquake's cast time, this is the interaction with Fulmination now. So Earthquake's cast time is reduced by 20% per stack of Fulmination, up to a cap of 100% obviously, so it being instant cast. So this would be 5 stacks of Fulmination to instant cast your Earthquake. And then Earthquake's damage is increased by 20% per stack of Fulmination, and this is up to 160%, so a full 8 stack Fulmination buff essentially. And now Earthquake also consumes all Fulmination stacks essentially when casted. This is exactly what I was saying before, where like the change from Seismic Thunder being a separate buff, now it's just over to Fulmination. Feels like Maelstrom yet again. The recent Totem Mastery redesign that happened in Shadowlands has turned out not as well as Blizzard had hoped, as they say. So they completely scrapped the entire talent. We're like, we're not doing Totem Mastery anymore because it's clunky as all heck and people don't really like it anymore. And they've entered and shuffled around some new talents, which is pretty cool. Sorry, just 1 new talent, but shuffled around another talent. So let's talk about that. First off, the way that Totem Mastery worked before this change was you drop down a Searing Totem, a Healing Stream Totem, and an Earthbind Totem where you were located, and that was it, right? So it only added extra utility on a complete damage tier. Talent row. So it was kind of just like, what is the use of this now if it's not giving me any resources or damage increase, right? So let's talk about where talents have moved from and to. So Elemental Blast has moved to the 25 row talent tree in place of Totem Mastery. So that Totem Mastery is out of there. Elemental Blast is in there again, which may open up more playstyle for the Elemental Blast people that love that spell. It's a pretty cool spell. I generally liked playing with it because it was aesthetically pleasing to play, and it fit pretty well in its rotation back when it was actually used. Now that it's off the same talent row as Echo the Elements, could free up some new ways of just shoving it into our rotation, which could be pretty cool. And Aftershock now only works with Earthshock cast and no longer has any interaction with Earthquake. This is kind of how things were working on the beta build before, so it's not really a surprise that they made this change, considering everything is revolving around Fulmination, and the Shoulders Legendary only interacts with Earthshock as it is. Aftershock could play a role if you get those Legendary Shoulders, so it could actually be pretty beneficial down the road when we have Legendaries incorporated into our build. Echoing Shock now only duplicates single target or targeted damaging, not single target, but target damaging or healing spells. So the way that it worked before is that you could actually duplicate an Earthquake on the ground, and this could pretty much benefit for both like your burst rotations, or like if you had a full 5 stack of Seismic Thunder, you could throw you could Echoing Shock, then Earthquake, and then it would throw at another fully buffed Earthquake out, which was pretty darn cool. But now it only works with targeted damaging abilities, but this includes Chain Lightning and obviously targeted healing spells, Chain Heal. So even though they are technically AoE or area of effect spells, they are targeted spells, which means they can still be duplicated by Echoing Shock. So a lot of people on the previous build would actually use Echoing Shock and couple it with Stormkeeper, which was a pretty cool iteration. So you would charge up your Stormkeeper effect, Echoing Shock the target, and then Chain Lightning. So it would overload on all your targets, and then you would immediately press Earthquake because you got a fully buffed Earthquake. And then it would Chain Lightning again on all of your targets because it takes the buff from the first one and just duplicates the spell. So you would have another Earthquake lined up, essentially, to just put out on your enemies. And then you still have one more stack of Stormkeeper, so you just Chain Lightning again, and you have now 3 Earthquakes in pretty quick succession on the ground, which was a pretty cool, nifty way to play with it. And I think this is going to be the usual way that we will bring into Mythic Plus until maybe we incorporate Aftershock with the Legendary Shoulders. So we'll see. Crossing fingers, Echoing Shock for a new and fun spell. To replace the empty slot left behind by Elemental Blast in the 15 talent row, there's actually a new talent called Static Discharge. Now, I've done a little bit of testing, but we'll talk about what this ability essentially does. So Static Discharge is an activated ability on a 30-second cooldown that requires you to have Lightning Shield active, okay? So using Static Discharge will cause some quick zaps of nature damage to strike enemies over 3 seconds, prioritizing any target that's affected by your Flame Shock debuff. Let's talk about this a little bit because it's actually a pretty cool effect. It's pretty much just lightning bolt animations that happen in quick succession. I believe it's like 5 or 6 zaps total, but it really doesn't do damage. Like, it's really poorly tuned as far as like what I've seen on the PTR. It doesn't do a lot of damage at all. So it could be really cool for adding particular effects on the target. So like, let's say a similar effect to the Psyche Shredder trinket. If you put the debuff for the Psyche Shredder on the target, and then any damage that you do to that target will then add additional damage in shadow magic or shadow damage. So you could essentially apply a debuff that will, when you hit the target with a damaging ability, add damage on top of it. It would work pretty well with that kind of thing, but it doesn't do a lot of damage on its own, and on the same talent row as even Earthen Rage, it does way less damage than Earthen Rage overall. And not to mention Echo of the Elements, like our bread and butter essentially at the beginning of each expansion that we want to use it. So Static Discharge, it's also a little bit bugged right now where it's not really affecting targets that are not even Flame Shock. So I did a little bit of testing as well for this. Even if I'm in combat with a bunch of mobs like the 4 target training dummies in Dazar lore, and I don't have any flame shocks out. When I press it, nothing happens. Like, it doesn't do anything. So currently it's a little bit bugged on the PTR as well. I'm sure they'll fix that, and they may even tune it so that it's a little bit more competitive with the other talents on that row. So we'll see what happens with that. But let's move on over to the enhancement section. Okay, so Enhancement Shaman changes. Blizzard stated that they're pretty happy with the latest build that was before this for the enhancement round changes, but they just wanted to make some minor talent changes. It's not really that minor, actually. That was a little bit of an overstep, but like similar to Elemental, they got rid of Totem Mastery, so it's no longer in there, and they replaced it again. They replaced that talent with another one, and they got rid of Cycle of the Elements, and we'll talk about what that did. Talent, and replaced it with another talent in the level 35 row. So Totem Mastery pretty much operated the same way as it did with the Elemental spec. It just summoned a Searing Totem, Healing Stream Totem, and Earthbind Totem at your location, but it wasn't really competitive at all with the other talents on that row, and it was just kind of like a utility thing. Yeah, that's all it was. It didn't do any damage because Searing Totem never does any damage. It pretty much never has. But they replaced it with this new talent called Ice Strike, which is my new favorite thing on the PTR for an enhancement, because it just adds so much cool interactions and fusions in your talent and your gameplay, and we'll talk about what it does. So strike your target with frost damage, okay, snaring them for 50% for 6 seconds, so kind of like Frost Shock essentially. But Ice Strike will also reset the cooldown of your Flame and Frost Shock spells. So that being said, you could do a really good synergy play with your Ice Strike, Flame Shock, and Fire Nova ability, and you could just get some insane, really cool visual like effects out and a lot of freaking crazy damage by just spreading your Flame Shock over the course of like a combat duration. And like you'll see, like I can spread up to like 5 Flame Shocks and maintain them actually pretty easily by just pressing Flame Shock on cooldown, and then also weaving in those Ice Strikes in there to reset the cooldown on my Flame Shock to keep up all these Flame Shock as a multiple targets. So you're essentially like this multi-dotting melee mage that's just like blasting people down with a Fire Nova every 12 seconds. And because your Flame Shock cooldown scales with haste, as well as like the Fire Nova cooldown and Ice Strike cooldown all scale with haste, like it's insane. I love this ability and the way that it synergizes just alone with Fire Nova. It's insane and so cool. It just reminds me of back in the day where we had like Lava Lash that spread our Flame Tongue on all the targets that we hit. As long as we put down our Flame Tongue on the target, we Lava Lashed it, spread Flame Tongue, and then we Fire Nova, and it was just like boom, a big explosion, and all of your frame rates just went down, and then you grabbed aggro and everything and probably died if your tank didn't hold it. But like, man, this is cool. I can't wait for people to test this out and just actually see what I'm talking about here, because it's visually really appealing and it plays pretty nice. Moving on to how the synergy works with Hailstorm. So a lot of people liked Hailstorm because it was like overpowered at the time, because it had an interaction with your mastery, your Maelstrom weapon, right? But it did so much damage in its first iteration that people like, oh my god, it's really OP. Anyway, it works with Frost Shock as well. So Ice Strike also resets the cooldown on Frost Shock. So you could gain 10 stack of Maelstrom weapon essentially, and then just like Chain Lightning, Crash Lightning, Frost Shock, Chain Lightning, Ice Strike, Frost Shock, and it would do pretty notable damage, obviously. And I don't know if it's going to be on par with the Fire Nova synergy. I think it synergizes better with Fire Nova, obviously, because it just makes it inherently more powerful than the 5 target cap Frost Shocks that you're doing, because you can get out so many Flame Shocks essentially. But I'm glad that it does have really good synergy with Hailstorm as well. They've also added a new talent to the level 5 tree that's replacing Cycle of Elements. So the way that Cycle of Elements used to work was every time that you Storm Striked, you would reset the cooldown of your shock spells. And I made a mistake in the last video going over like the alpha changes to Enhancement Shaman, and I thought they were on 2 separate talent trees, and I thought that effect itself would synergize really well if you could reset the cooldown of your shock spells, and then you could have some really good synergies. Anyway, I misspoke in that video, but they added it in this game, or in this build, with Ice Strike, so I'm just happy. Anyway, so the new level 35 talent is essentially Elemental Assault, and it's a single target damage increase. So like now you can make this build where you essentially just put all your talents in a single target iteration and use Ascendance. And now your Storm Strike, when you're spec'd into Elemental Assault, it deals 15% increased damage, but it also generates a stack of Maelstrom Weapon. So normally, like, your Storm Strike has a chance to generate a stack of Maelstrom Weapon, but this is guaranteed, which is really cool, and it kind of speeds up the gameplay of the spec a little bit when it comes to just like nailing down into one target. So you can build this talent spec up where you're just like all into Wind Fury and Storm Strike, and then you go into Ascendance and you're just like bam, 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 bam. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of wanted to meme there a little bit with the surfer dude that's like getting interviewed, but Storm Strike, increased damage on a talent row where like you actually have a choice depending on what you're doing, which is fantastic. You could either go into a full raid set, boss fight, like single target with the Elemental Assault, which I think fits in perfectly in this talent row, or you can go into like a light cleave scenario with Hailstorm, or you could go into just a massive AoE scenario with Fire Nova. So it's like, damn, this is a really well-designed talent row, I feel, just with the choices that you can have, as well as like how it synergizes with the rest of your talent specs. I think right now, Enhancement Shaman is probably looking like one of the more complete specs in the game as far as like Shadowlands preparations goes for Blizzard. And I think a lot of people are going to be really, really happy with this. They also made another change to one of the Venthyr abilities for Shaman, which was Chain Harvest. I wanted to quickly talk about this because Chain Harvest was the weakest effect, or at least Covenant ability in the game, and they buffed it by an additional like 180% spell damage or spell power. So now when it deals damage, instead of 120 spell power, it deals 300 spell power, 300% spell power damage, and can heal up to 5 allies, right? It damages 5 enemies and heals up to 5 allies. So it's just they buffed it because it was one of the weaker ones, and now it's looking like a little bit more competitive with the other ones. So we'll see where this leads us, but I just wanted to let you guys know the cool and new changes that are coming to the Shaman for both Elemental and Enhancement specs. I'm really excited about them. I'm sure a lot of you guys are as well. Let me know what you guys think of the changes down below in the comment section down below. Hit this YouTube video with a like button if you like it. Subscribe for more Shaman content going into the future. And until next time, guys, keep calm and fulmination on. Bye-bye.